So this week we're going to cover Lab 3, our next lab, because Lab 2 was last week. And so this week we're going to walk over topics of basically Chapter 13. This will prepare us for conversation next week about the final project. So let's get started with Lab 3 and go through the topics discussed over here. So the design of these labs are individual projects for every lab that we work on. So what we're going to do is that we're going to make a copy of Lab 2, basically clone the project. So I already opened my Visual Studio, but I haven't started any projects yet. So what I'm going to do first is to jump to the location of my labs under C155 GUI, under labs. I have this lab 2. So what I'm going to do is step number 1, I'm going to delete the directories vs and debug, because those are the results of the prior build. Just basically delete them. When I'm confident about deletion, I press Shift Delete, which deletes the files permanently. So yes, and once deleted, going back to the labs, just make a copy of the project by copy and same place paste, and we can rename it. And now we can rename this to be Chapter 13 and Lab 3. That's my choice for this new name of the project directory. And so this is now the project which I will open to continue our work, because we need all the project settings to be able to compile our lab with the full tech library with the graphical user interface library that we're using. Okay, so this is basically the location. So from here we can copy location of the project, and now inside Visual Studio we just say File, Open Project, and jump here, right? And we can paste this location and open, still named the Lab 2 solution, but we will now rename it. I'll click View, Solution Explorer. This is the name of the solution. If you right click, we can rename it here. I see there is an option to rename. So here we'll just name it again Chapter 13 and Lab 3 for today's set of tasks. And similarly, rename the project name. There is a rename option over here, or you can press F2 to rename. We're just going to do this. And then under the project source files, so we should have our files, and those will stay the same. And we continue our coverage about the organization of the project and all the roles that these files play and what's happening. So typically now we can save it, and of course we're doing our programming in the main file. That's where most of the lab work was done. So this is here. I guess we can rename this we're just going to look at Chapter 13, right? Just to be consistent. Yes, we'll be doing examples of examples from chapter 13 of our textbook. Okay, very good. So anyways, I did some extra work now. Because I made a copy of it, I'll remove the files that I don't need, and we still keep the simple window. And at the end, we just wait for button. So we'll just keep it like this. Let's try building everything just to be sure that everything holds together properly. Okay, so there are some warnings that come with the type mismatch warnings that should be addressed at some point, but because they're pointing to the files that came from the book, I don't fix them right now. Anyways, if I run it again, the initial screen is just a blank canvas window like this. Without, this is the name where it's coming from, and these are the parameters that were used to create this window. And I just click next button. So right now this window is waiting right here for this button to be clicked. So I click it and the application closes, because then after the wait for button is over, then we just return. Okay, so this is our starting point. So we just completed our first part of our lab 3. Once again, this is the laboratory exercise that we're trying to complete this week. So here's the copy of the project. We did renaming according to this part, and we're testing it already, and so obviously we can save it. I would suggest that when you're submitting your final project, or in general, if you want to clone a project and preserve it, what I would typically do, just go here to window. I normally close all windows, and then I'd say build clean, which removes all the artifacts that were produced by the latest build, right? So clean solution is the option. And then I say file close solution to just let go of this of Visual Studio holding a lot of files and directories under its control. So to release that, it's good to exit Visual Studio, close the solution. And then if we go to our project folder now, we can delete the VS and debug folders like this. And then we can just go here, right click, and say, I use 7-zip, so we can just create a zip file. So this is the way I would create a zip file. Basically, like I said, clean the solution, close the solution, then inside the project, deleting debug and other directories above source, and then going back here and just making a zip file. And so this is now the copy of this project. So at this stage, I just leave it alone, because maybe I can use it for our next project. Will be our final project this semester. So let's go reopen the project. So this time my recent projects are here. So this will be the latest one, I suppose. This is the right one. Okay, very good. Here we go. And back to the lab. So we discussed in our earlier labs that the first rule of the organization of our graphics library is that when we create all sorts of graphical primitives like rectangle, polygons, um, circles, and other types of primitives. By the way, one of the primitives is a text label. Text label is also treated as a primitive. When these objects are created in memory, they have to be attached to the window. Once they're attached to the window can notify, like basically once the window gets graphical user interface uh, uh, library receives notifications from the operating system regarding the time when the window needs to be shown. The window gets a draw call from the library, and this window then iterates through all these shapes that were originally attached and tells them that it's time to make some effort to make themselves visible. And so these graphical user interface primitives are calling the under the hood. They're all using GUI library, FLTK library that we're using to draw lines or print characters on the screen in specific places. Uh, fill areas with certain colors and all this. So this is where it's happening. But the original idea is that they all need to be attached to then receive notifications that they need to be shown or drawn or displayed on the screen. So the next part of this chapter discusses the organization of the source files. Of course, we can see organization of the source files inside Visual Studio under the source files. Under the source files, we have a list of files. One of the files that we've been using pretty actively is this file, the main file, where the main function is, and where we're throwing in a lot of experimental uh, code between these wait for button calls, and we were able to display various shapes and images and other types of primitives that were available through samples that came with lab 2. But now it's time to examine the rest of the files and also discuss what is located where and what is implemented where. So we have graph, GUI, and window additional files that are included in our source files list. So they contain functions and structures and classes that represent components of the graphics library. If we open one of these files like this, of course, it happens to also include the corresponding header files. So, for instance, graph.cpp contains graphlib namespace with plenty of definitions of various classes and structures and functions. But at the same time, to be able to reuse the content of this file, what happens is that there is corresponding header file that is also available. And so this header file then can be included in other files like this. So then we can refer to this file and obviously it contains declarations and of various structures and various functions which we can now reuse in our code. So you see that the includes of the header file are present in our main file, but also if we look at the CPP file, the implementation file, the corresponding header file is also available. Now notice the difference. Let me move this to another side like this, that graph.cpp says include graph.h, whereas in the main file we say include book / graph.h. The difference comes from the fact that our project is organized in such way that we have the project subfolder, which is this lab 3 chapter 13, but my preference is to keep all of the source files under src or source subfolder here. And you see that my main file is located directly in this location, but all the files that came with the book, I actually keep under the book subdirectory. So this is why when we're using this main GUI.cpp in our project, to be able to include a certain file, I use book / graph.h. This is the relative path to apparently this header file under the book subfolder over here. So, but at the same time, graph.cpp, which is included on the list of source files, is already located in the subfolder named book. And you see that because graph.h is already in the same folder, it does not need anything else, just uses include graph.h. Okay, so this is why there is difference over here. So it depends, it's all relative. Includes are when you use relative path. And remember, the relative path is any path that starts without a reference to the root directory. And of course, this is just the name of the file, but the name of the file inside include is also a relative path to that file. So relative to what? Relative to the location of the file that contains the include. And here in main.cpp, a relative path to graph.h needs a subfolder. So just a note about this organization, because that should not come as any kind of confusion here, because you can construct paths that refer to various directories, and the include with double quotes like this uses a relative path relative to the location of the file itself. All right. So anyway, that's regarding the location. Now, what is inside these files that came with the book? This graph.cpp contains definitions of shape classes. I call them graphical primitives. So it's like the most primitive type of graphical user interface element that you can think about. So there is rectangle, there is open polyline, there is closed polyline. We'll see the differences. There's a polygon, which is like a shape formed by these lines. There is text. Text is very helpful because it allows us to construct labels. Axis that we've already seen before. Circle, there's ellipse, there's image. So we can show images. And additional classes include we call them utility classes inside libraries, or helper classes inside libraries, that they themselves are not presentable graphical user primitives, but they're building blocks of these primitives. So we have colors, we have style of lines, and we have font object, which allows us to specify the appearance of characters if we want to display printable characters. GUI.cpp is actually something that we're going to be working on next semester, and these concerns construction of forms that contain user input to gadgets such as text boxes, scroll bars, text areas, all sorts of gadgets like buttons and everything else. which allows us to communicate with the user like in a business application. So there's a rich set of different classes over there. And so this is already included in our project, but today we're just using only one button that allows us to navigate through multiple displays. But this will be covered next semester. Main GUI is our main file, and window provides the application window as a container for all of the graphical user primitives. So so we have this include, and normally if you have your own setup of the project with your default settings, most of the time you should be able to right click inside Visual Studio and say go to the document. In my case, I have disabled a lot of functionality inside my Visual Studio so that so it's not using like IntelliSense prompts and other fluffy features. So that's why this is also being disabled. So my approach to showing these files is simply obviously notice that we don't have header files on the list of source files because header files are not source files. If we want to be able to display this graph.h, or I have to do this, I just need to go to the proper subfolder. So this is our project folder, go under source, go under book, and here's the header file. So I just drag and drop and open it this way, right? So this is the way I am going to be opening these files in my project. Okay, very good. Okay, where's my lab? So there's a very helpful diagram that describes project organization. And it says that basically, look, in fact, let me try to copy this image, and I just do some of my own uh, mm, demonstration here. Okay, let me resize this. Okay, good enough, I think. It's all visible. All right, so this is what I'll be using. So we'll be navigating back and forth between our code and this demo over here. So the way this project is organized, in fact, let's make visible our Solution Explorer. I can press Control down and start dragging this window to undock it and move it to some other location, which I sometimes do when I use multiple screens. Okay, so I made it visible here, and now I have my demo window right here. You can see that, of course, the project is constructed from the source files, but the source files themselves have include directives that point to the header files. So this diagram includes both. So right here, let's let's start doing some highlighting over here. So this is the file name graph.cpp, which is of course included over here, right? So this happens to be one of the files that we put on the list of source files. And then these arrows in this diagram show include directives. So this graph.cpp is compiled individually, basically just the file that is being compiled because it's on our list of source files. So this file happens to include, you can see it includes graph.h. So on this diagram, it's the file right here. So it includes this file graph.h. And this diagrams that shows us that besides definitions that are contained in this graph.h file, we also have other includes. So it includes the point structure. You can see point.h. There is a header file named point.h over here. And then it also includes the entire set of FLTK headers, which is the open source library that we are using in our project, right? So this is where we use FLTK.h. Besides that, we also include stdlib facilities, which is another file that came with this header file. Okay, next thing, we include GUI.cpp, right? So GUI.cpp is a file that is shown over here on this diagram. You can see that GUI.cpp also includes its own set of definitions, which I presume would be in, let me just open this as well, GUI.cpp right here, right? So if I open this file, GUI.cpp, relocate it here, you see that it includes this file right here, which is called GUI.h. So these red rectangles are showing the header files that are being included by the implementation files. Implementation files are CPP files, and the rest of the files are header files. So then we also include window.cpp right here, right? So it's this file over here. And so this is the third file, which is shown right here, that we include. And once again, it includes its own window.h file. And notice that the header files shown here, here, and here all include point. They all include FLTK headers. And of course, the FLTK headers, because we already have compiled, we have already built this library in our first session, in our first lab, when we started talking about graphical user interface components. This code we already built ourselves, and we already copied it over in a compiled form into our lib subfolder. And these files here are included by the linker, right? So the files over here are included by the linker. These files are included by the linker. And these files are essentially made part of our own project right here, right? So these are the source files that we put on the source file list, and the implementation for the library comes from already pre-built files. And if you look at the project settings, you can look under linker settings, and you will see a lot of references to these files under lib subfolder in our project. So this diagram just shows you how is everything organized and how is everything built. And finally, what's named here chapter 12, this is our own main.gui.cpp. That's my name that I used for naming my own main file right here. Okay, so this is the main file shown like a green box. So this is our project organization, and it kind of shows you all the insider view into all included header files, and also implementation files that came with the library. And everything right here are the headers. Okay, so that's our like basic setup that we're using in order to be able to make this graphical user interface visible